good evening, wherever you are. Good afternoon, good mornings. My name is Rutendo Nyaku. I am the Rule of Law Advisor at the ALN Academy, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. The first thing that I want to say is thank you all so much for joining us today and for taking time to listen to our very advanced, progressive, young panel that I'm very proud of for today's webinar, which is entitled Youth Agency in Africa's Trading Landscape and Building Youth-Responsive Trade Ecosystems. We're really hoping that all of you who are here are going to help us have a dynamic conversation using the Q&A page. Any questions that you may have, we'll be answering them as we go through the moderated panel sessions. Please feel free as well to drop any questions you might have in our email as well as our social media pages. But other than that, welcome once again. Okay, next slide. So I'll first begin by introducing all of the organizations that we're working with today. The main host is the ALN Academy, which I'm part of as the Rule of Law Advisor. It's a charity promoting the rule of law in Africa as a pathway for strong socio-political and economic growth. To make this webinar possible, we have partnered with some amazing organizations whose speakers you're going to hear today. Next slide. One of them is the African Union Commission's Women, Gender and Youth Directorate of the African Union Commission, which is supporting youth-led innovation, entrepreneurship and engagement. Natan is going to be the speaker from the African Union and is going to tell us more about the work that they're doing. Next slide. The next organization we have, which Anele is going to be representing, is the Independent Continental Youth Advisory Council on the AfCFTA, which is a youth-led body initiated by young people from the continent of Africa under the guidance and stewardship of the ULEAD Africa, MSTCDC, GIZ Africa Union Office. Next slide. And finally, last but not least, is the South African Youth Trade Association, which is a member-based organization focused on creating viable and sustainable opportunities for youth in trade. So we're going to be joined by Siyabonga, who's going to be representing the organization and letting us know a little bit more what's happening on the southern side of Africa. And another colleague of mine is Chelangat, who is going to be representing Africa Legal Network Kenya, which is a top corporate law firm in Africa, with presence in 15 countries in East and West Africa, as well as Southern Africa. So Faith is going to be leading us on the international trade front, and I cannot wait to hear what her insights are going to be. Next slide. So as I said, my name is Rutendo Nyaku. I'm your moderator for today, and I'd like to introduce you to our speakers on the next slide. Siyabonga from the South African Youth Trade Association is a treasurer with CITA, and he is a musical person with a wide taste in music. But Siyabonga cannot sing for his life, so please don't ask him to ever sing. So welcome, Siyabonga. We can't wait to hear from you. Our next speaker is Faith Chelangat, who, as a result of a paper she presented at the University of Pretoria on the Guided Trade Initiative, Faith earned the nickname the GTI Mama. So today we'll be hearing from the GTI Mama, and we cannot wait. It's going to be very exciting. Next is Anele Simon, who is the Acting Secretary General of the Independent Continental Youth Advisory Council. I've had the pleasure of interviewing Anele on a previous paper, which we will be circulating after this conversation. And really, we're going to be hearing some wonderful insights and perspectives from Anele. So welcome, Anele. And finally is Natan, who is the Innovation Associate at the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate of the African Union Commission. He's a sociologist with a keen interest in local food wherever he travels. So please, to our wide audience, keep inviting Natan to your countries. He will eat all the local food, I promise. All right, getting into it. Next slide. So our speakers today are going to be speaking on a wide variety of topics, and I'd just like to set some context and opportunity in terms of what we're trying to discuss here. The question about youth has always been a sort of troubling one, and we've noticed in a lot of discussions, it's usually people speaking about youth and how they can be included. And part of what we're trying to solve for today is actually having youth themselves who are working in the trade space to discuss what is happening from a goods perspective as well as from a service perspective. African countries are increasingly trading with each other, and so we're seeing some resilience as global trade faces challenges. young Africans represent a critical demographic that can drive economic expansion through trade initiatives. And this is information I believe a lot of us already know. Then we have the AfCFTA, which presents a historic chance to reshape the continent's economic landscape, particularly by leveraging a very young demographic, which acts as a factor of development. Next slide. Right. What we're also seeing about Africa's youth demographic is that by 2050, Africa will host 1 in 3 of the world's youth. And with this massive demographic that's not being taken advantage of, we're seeing a lot of massive inequality and disillusionment among the youth. The Afrobarometer recently released a survey saying that actually most youth in Africa don't even care about democratic institutions anymore and prefer strongman tendencies such as militarization. While official youth unemployment is around 8.9%, it masks underemployment and informal work, which is part of what we're going to be discussing today, the inclusion of the informal trade within the broader AfCFTA operations. Young Africans are not are already trading in ways that are very innovative, but are not included in formal structures. And so the AfCFTA protocol on women and youth is going to be a big part of our discussion today. Next slide. Youth-led trade in action. So we want to be discussing today the ways forward, recommendations, suggestions, and we encourage all of you to please give us your suggestions so that at the end of this webinar, we'll be able to put together a report that doesn't just mimic the regular recommendations for policymakers, but that actually works towards initiative and innovation. The systemic barriers remain, of course. 91% of youth-led firms struggle to access finance due to a lack of collateral. Many are underprepared for export, even the export of their own services, which is their intellectual minds. So what is at stake is not just economics, but it's the fact that a critical demographic for this continent's economic development is not being fully leveraged. And so it's important for us to move forward in this conversation, understanding where we're at. So with that, I would like to open up the discussion with the panelists and give them a warm welcome. And the warm welcome I will give them is an opening question for us to set the scene. So the question is, you each work at different levels of Africa's trade ecosystem, from legal reform and continental policy to grassroots mobilization. When you reflect on your current role, what does youth inclusion in trade look like right now? Are young people truly shaping trade agendas, or are we still stuck at the level of promise and conversations about potential? Perhaps we'll start off with Faith, and then we can go to Natan, Siyabonga, and Anele.
Hi, Rutendo. Am I audible? All right, thank you so much. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for joining this call and wanting to hear from us and learn as much as you can as well, you know, from the insights that you're going to share today and the questions that you're going to be giving us to help you address, and for all of us to also like go back home with something to think about. So to answer your question, when I think of youth inclusion, to be very honest with you, it's a 50-50 answer. It's not an accurate, yes, we are fully included, and it's not an accurate answer as well to say that, no, we are not fully included. I think if I look at from paper to action, that's where the challenge mainly lies, because we have good protocols. We have the protocol on women and youth. We have the digital protocol. We have the intellectual property rules, we have the investment protocol, and all of these have the aspects of including youth in trade, of providing youth with a platform to, you know, trade cross-border wise, with a platform for youth to have trade finance. But the truth is, you know, realistically speaking, and when we come to what is happening at the ground level, me and you both know that this is not the case, and that's why we still have issues, and even having this webinar to speak about what is really happening, because we have good laws, but the trading is not happening. We have development actors and banks providing for trade finance, but what is not happening? And I feel like these are issues that we're going to speak about them as we get in the webinar. But to answer your question, it's a 50-50, good paper, less action. So if I am to address whether there is promise and potential, I'd say yes, because if we're even having these conversations at this level, it means that we are recognizing that there's a problem, and there's a problem right here, and there are people who can, help us resolve this problem. We can have these conversations and we can have solutions to this problem. So yes, there is a promise to move to potential, but we need to have those active conversations. So we're just not going to rely on the protocols and hope that since there are protocols, we're going to move on. We need to have those conversations here.
Faith, I think, like you said, we're laying the ground on having these discussions and hopefully move even beyond potential into action. Perhaps we hear from you, Natan.
Thank you so much, Rutendo. Again, thank you for the opportunity. I think to answer your question, just like stated before, youth involvement in these things we can say is 50-50. I wouldn't say we've gotten far, but we're not in the back either. Let me just say, I think from the perspective of our directorate in the commission, youth inclusion, when it comes to trade, it just doesn't feel like it's just a promise or no longer just a promise, but it's gradually becoming institutionalized. I think maybe through concrete actions and frameworks. A major milestone, I would say, maybe is the AfCFTA protocol on women and youth in trade that was adopted last year in 2024, which is a legally binding instrument that commits member states to remove barriers and actively integrate young people into Africa's trading ecosystem. So through access to finance, certification, digital tools, and also like value chains. So at WGYD, we are also translating these commitments into practice. For example, through the AU Youth Startup Pavilion we're going to be having at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair. We're not just giving visibility to the youth entrepreneurs, but also we're building capacity, offering trade-focused masterclasses, connecting young innovators with investors and possible markets. Also through our 1 Million Next Level initiative, we are embedding youth in broader economic opportunity structures, including entrepreneurship, education, digital innovation, many of which link kind of directly to trade. So while challenges still remain, I think the foundations are slowly beginning to be laid, and young people are no longer on the sidelines. Let me say, I think even having this conversation, like my colleague said, they're starting to shape, maybe going to start this, shaping trade agendas, not just as beneficiaries, but also as, let me say, co-creators of Africa's economic future. Yes, that's it from my side. Please go ahead, Chair.
Fantastic, Nate. And I think you've really brought out an important part, which is the fact that policy-wise, we're actually seeing some milestones. And what I'm interested to know from Siyabonga, for instance, is from the practical perspective, where on the ground where youth are actually trading. What are some of your reflections there, Siyabonga? What are you seeing on the ground? And are you sort of seeing youth being truly shaping the agendas and sort of moving beyond just the policy and into the actual everyday work of doing trade for you?
Good day, colleagues. Greetings to the young people that are also here in this session. It's always great when you have young people in such conversations looking to provide solutions. Perhaps before I answer your question, allow me to just give a brief background of what the SA Youth Trade Association is in summary, which is we are an organization that seeks to increase the level of participation of youth-led businesses in the export market. So we have identified two main themes here, which is capacity building and access to information, because we believe that there is a conducive environment already, but how young people do access that information is key. So that's why we have programs that are aligned to ensure that young people have the access to information. Your question speaks towards, is young people driving the trade agenda? And I do think young people are driving the trade agenda, but what are the programs that can help young people become effective within trade? For an example, if you look in the informal cross-border trading, you will find that a majority of people trading in informal cross-border is young people. Therefore, that's why we have schemes that allow us to say, how can we put the informal sector into the formal cross-border trading? And that is an example of how young people are driving trade agendas. For an example, within our programs at CITA, we have identified the key barriers to entry for young people. And that forms part of our many programs, that how can young people access the various industries, the various capital requirements within trade. And as an organization, we are mostly youth-led. So that also speaks to how young people are driving the trade agenda. So it's twofold. It's organizations like CETA, but also young people on the ground who are business people are really trading, but they need now the support to say, how can they better trade within the regional market and within the cross-border trade and global trade within other countries. So for that question, that's how I would put that. Yes, there is potential, but how we address this potential will determine how we see the African trading spectrum within the next 10 years.
Siyabonga, I think what you're saying largely sort of responds to the work that Natan has been doing. And I appreciate the fact that you're saying that there's a conducive environment already, but the access to information continues to be a problem. And effectively leveraging what is available continues to be an issue for young people. So I suppose in that way, we kind of understand capacity building in a different light versus just many other ways. But I'd really love to hear from the work that Ikoyaka is doing. Anele, I don't know if you're here with us, and I would love to hear from you.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining. Just in brief, Ikoyaka is a Continental youth advisory on AfCFTA mostly, but we also help young people in other trade, whether it's regional or national, because in order for you to trade AfCFTA, you at least need a regional, national sort of outlook. We are in every AfCFTA member state, and what we do is we try to make sure that young people or young Africans are no longer just a background thought when it comes to trade. I know that African Union and other partners, we always talk about Agenda 2063, what are our goals, what are the, how are we measuring all of that? And when you think about Agenda 2063, it's not for me or you or anyone on this call, and I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but the person born in the year 2000, what we call AMA 2000, they will be 63 in 2063. So who are we really figuring out for? And so Ikoyaka really works to make sure that when it comes to AfCFTA, young people understand it. It's very technical, it's very difficult, and we try to make sure we simplify it as best as possible, especially for young entrepreneurs, but also for academics and just consumers. To answer your question, I would say, again, to be a little pessimistic, I guess it's my kind of day, but I am not as optimistic as the rest of the panel in that, are we driving, the trade agenda? I do believe that we are now speaking more boldly about trade, which is a great first step. But I don't believe we can say we are drivers yet. So we're somewhere caught between the rhetoric and the reality. Yes, some great strides have been made. We now have the Protocol of Women and Youth in Trade. It's the first of its kind, and that's amazing that we are being thought of like this. However, when it comes to policies, it's always still an afterthought. Young people, when it comes to trade policy, the policies are authored, they're designed, and then thereafter, organizations such as Ikoyaka or other young organizations or young people are consulted to say, hey, there's this policy, how do you think we should implement it? Which is great, but we should have been there at the design. So I wouldn't say we're in the driving seat just yet. But what's also important is not just policy, it's the way that our continent is also just structured. It's in a way that trade is kind of meant to be difficult, not just for young people, but for MSMEs, those are micro, small, and medium enterprises. So if you don't have a lot of money, it's not very easy to scale. And then young people are usually caught within that bracket of MSMEs, whereby there's infrastructural problems, there's problems with digital, there are problems with access to finance and how we access finance in the traditional sense. It's really made for people who have made it in life. And a lot of young Africans cannot say they've made it in life. So them accessing finance in the traditional way is always going to be difficult. If it's things that you can't solve for, but it's up to your government to solve for, provision of proper infrastructure for trade to move, whether it's by air, by road, by sea, whatever, a young person can't do much about that. So you are at the mercy of others. So as much as we are being included as young people in the trade agenda and I guess in some of the policy conversations, I can't say right now, I think we're in the driving seat. Next.
Thanks, Anele, for that. I think I really, as the conversation goes on, I would love to hear more on what would an inclusive design mechanism look like, right? From design, implementation, execution. And I think an important thing that you've just mentioned is we are speaking boldly, but we are actually not yet at the level of driving. And so I think I would love, as we go along, for all of us to be reflecting on what does driving actually look like, especially when it is leading to outcomes. And another important thing that you've also mentioned for Anele is with the Agenda 2063, right? It's a tomorrow issue when we need to be solving for outcomes that are today. And I think that's something that as well we need to be thinking about. When you said someone was born in 2000, will be 63 years old, I'm thinking about how old I am going to be. I don't even want to reflect upon that. I think that's a very, very scary thought. Right. I think those are very important reflections, and I'm glad we've got sort of diverse thinkings around the status of the AfCFTA for youth and where youth stand as it's concerned. I like what Siyabonga is saying, that in informal dynamics, we are kind of actually seeing youth sort of driving to some extent, but it's again that very complete separation with sort of more formal policymakers. And to Anele's point that trade really seems like a rich man's game. So yeah, more of us speaking a little bit on that. So moving into the first session, we just really want to speak about what does it take to unlock high value trade pathways, whether from an sort of import-export perspective, in a goods perspective as well as service perspective. So Faith, I want to direct that question to you. Youth are often stuck in low margin trade sectors. And from a legal and institutional standpoint, what do you think is preventing their movement up the value chain? And how can the AfCFTA protocol on youth and women be used to close this gap?
Okay. First of all, I wish there was like an emoji to echo what everyone has said, including including the pessimist side and the optimist side. I feel like we are saying the same thing, right? Like we have good paper, but why aren't we actioning that to match exactly what we have? And to answer your question, Rutendo, I want to be as practical as possible. I think we have this imagination in our heads that since it's the AfCFTA, it's also the AfCFTA Secretariat to make sure that the protocols are in line. It's the AfCFTA Secretariat to make sure that the investment protocol is actually functioning. But no, it's the state's responsibility. Like at the end of the day, it's up to Kenya to decide that, hey, the AfCFTA Women and Youth Protocol has been enacted, it has been implemented, we have adopted it, so let's put it into action. It's up to the state to do that. But you see, this is the thing, right? The state is failing us. Not that I want to be sacrificed on anything, but this is the thing. We need to have active mechanisms in ministries of trade, in promotion agencies, in development actors. And this is quite an experience that I've had when I was dealing with quality standards, just trying to help women and youth scale up in terms of export readiness and value addition of their products. And most of the time, like Anele said, trade becomes a rich man's issue. It's all about who is export ready. That's the person who gets the trade finance. But when it comes to a youth-led SME, a youth-owned farm, no one is really so much interested in that. I think it's also this general misconception that you're a youth, you still have time, you can do other things. Meanwhile, let the big people with the rich pockets do the trade. But you see, that is actually very wrong, because the youth are the people who are championing AI and trade finance, digital inclusivity, all these things to do with the digital aspect of making trade work cross-border, and no one wants to look at that. So I think one of the issues that I have experienced personally that actually became an issue that I have with development actors is the fact that there's a lot of ignorance when it comes to youth-led SMEs or youth-owned SMEs. No one is putting into consideration the fact that can we have responsive policies to youth and say, for example, we can provide grants to youth-led SMEs. Maybe if a company has 50% of youth, or if a company is actually owned by a youth that is between 18 to 35 years. So none of that is really taken into consideration as much. Like I said, paper is good, but action is very poor. Number two, this is what I wanted to say with youth and ministries. When I say that it's a state responsibility, it means that when AfCFTA has already created the AfCFTA and its instruments, right? It comes down to a country like Kenya, for example, to decide that we're going to have national implementation committees that are going to push for AfCFTA. And when we dive down to youth, that means we're having things like youth trade desks, that are purely dedicated to youth, so that if you're a youth and you're trading across borders from Kenya, maybe to Ghana, you need to understand actually how to export your products. You need to understand preferential trade agreements and how those preferential trade agreements apply to your products. But none of this is happening because there's this general misconception that it's the AfCFTA, they'll do that. Once we get there, we will understand. And I feel like we're missing out now, because in another experience that I have, I've seen actually youth-led and youth-owned farms deciding to go for foreign markets, for example, like the EU and the Kenya, and EU and UK, right? Because we have EPAS with them. And these are people who are very much dedicated to provide most of this information to the youth, to provide trade finance, to give them development finance, to help them scale up and give them value addition to their products. But that is missing in the AfCFTA context. And it's also missing just generally from, and boosting intra-African trade between Africans and us as youth. Thirdly, I will speak about the limitation in trade finance. In one of an engagement that I had with UNDESA, it was in preparation for the Financing for Development conference that was happening in Spain. I was tasked with writing, a critique paper actually to the zero draft of the Financing for Development. And you see, the thing is, these people want us to scale up in terms of having more revenue for a country, without considering where the revenue is going to come from. That means expanding the tax base. And in one of the commitments, it was to help the youth and the women, majorly people engaged in SMEs and MSMEs, to trade. It was providing development finance. But you see, this was something that was also missing. The fact that there should be policies that respond to youth. So when you're talking about a youth, you're looking at things that Anele mentioned. These people don't have the capital that is required for them to compete internationally or to compete cross-border. But the policies don't even look at that, right? The policies is just like, you're a youth, you're export ready, you have your products certified, you can get into it. But no, that's not the case. That's really not the case. Finding someone who's trying to trade cross-border means that you're going to help them from certifications to getting them all the understanding the custom procedures, and no one wants to do that. It really becomes a problem of political willingness at the end of the day. Are we just going to scale up people who are export ready, people who are already trading in the market, or now let's channel all of this energy back to the youth? And finally, I would say that another issue would be on the regulatory and, the complexity of standards. There is a constant need to harmonize that across borders from an EAC, regional to continental level. And if that cannot happen, it means that this youth, even if they try to understand how to trade cross-border, it means that they're spending a lot of money, which money is an issue. And that obviously eats into the profit margin that they're already trying to gain. So that makes them even, rely on informal cross-border, because no one is going to look into their custom taxes. No one is going to look into their quality standards. So none of those is going to be taken into consideration. All they can focus on is profit. But if we are to boost intra-African trade, I feel like the AfCFTA, Women and Youth Protocol, together with state responsibility, should really combine forces to help the youth to scale up. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot for that, Faith. I think, there are two very important things that you've mentioned, which is the state's responsibility, how you could mobilize. But I think there's a question here I'm going to open to the floor just after Anele's intervention, which is the fact that, as you've mentioned, right, the trading seems for people who are export ready, people who already have the capital. But as Siyabonga already mentioned, we are seeing a lot of youth trade in informal circles, meaning at a micro scale, there is an opportunity to exploit that. And I'd like us, to sort of be reflecting, to think about how could we actually be exploiting these sort of microspheres that are seemingly kind of doing well, and sort of aligning them with what the AfCFTA presents. Because there's got to be a way that we can bridge this gap somehow. And I think this conversation is going to take us through. In the meantime, another issue that you've also sort of raised is the regulatory aspect of it. And I know in a very, very different life that I was speaking to Anele, she spoke about the issue of sort of disputes and dispute management, and in the fact that there isn't enough of a skill set. So one question I'm going to be asking Anele is, what specific mechanisms can help young entrepreneurs move into high value areas like intellectual property, digital trade, or service exports? And in the cases of disputes, how should they be handling that?
I'm muted, my apologies. That's quite a complex question because, again, my expertise is on international trade, so I'll keep it to where I have knowledge. Firstly, when it comes to, we talk a lot about entrepreneurship and how entrepreneurship can get us out of poverty or reach, levels of economic empowerment. And you'll notice that we never really talk enough. It is mentioned here and there, but we never really talk enough about ascension to these high value sectors. No one's saying like, oh, look at all these young people who are in mining. And I don't talk about, sort of like illegal or informal mining. Or look at all these young people who are leading IT firms and are leading these service sectors. And that's what we need, right? Right now, we're kind of talking from, and I'm sorry to say this, but for lack of a better word, sometimes we're talking from a point of hunger, whereby how do we just survive poverty? And we should be talking from a place of aspiration, really important. And again, in the Protocol of Women and Youth in Trade, I've now forgotten the article. What a bad lawyer that makes me. I believe it's Article 10, but I'll come back to you, where it says that governments, like Nathan said, they're obligated. Okay, the protocol's not a bunch of suggestions. They have an obligation to incentivize, the access of women and youth in high value sectors where there's low participation. What does a high value sector with low participation look like? Well, it will depend in every country. It'll be different in every country. So we could say that digital trade and ICT, that's high value. You could say in other sectors, mining is high value and there's low participation. In other countries, you could say it's the medical field and things like that. So when governments can identify this and say, these young people, if they were to enter these sectors, we can grow these sectors and there's longevity. We make sure that they're growing, they're going to grow other young people. And then we push incentives into that, making sure that they participate. I don't know many young people that own mines. You guys might, or even some that own, big shareholding in mines or in hospitals or in big tech firms. We talk about unicorns when you talk about tech and digital trade and e-commerce and all those things, but how many African unicorns are there really? When you look at sort of like fintech and what it's done in East Africa, I'm still, till this day, I'm always like, wow, I cannot believe this is how people are paying. I always try to make sure I get a Safaricom SIM card. But we should have known that this is what was going to happen. We should have learned. If you look at what Nigerian young people are doing in fintech, that's where the government is supposed to be incentivizing, because they can see that there's a huge potential for growth, and traditional banking is letting people down and people aren't trusting it. So follow the future and incentivize. That's what it says in the protocol. But like Faith said, it now becomes about state wanting to do it. You know, it's your political will as a state. Are you actually going to do it? When it comes to dispute resolution, so this is where it becomes a bit tricky, right? So I'm buying from Salamowitz, and maybe she's in Ethiopia, and she is waiting for a component that's coming from Abubakar, who's maybe in Senegal, and I'm waiting for the final product here. Somewhere along the line, I don't get that product. And this happens continuously, not just to me, but to many other people. So now there's a lot of us affected by the same, you know, route, or those governments are not giving us the AfCFTA rates, whatever. What people don't seem to understand is that with international trade, it's not that straightforward as if I'm buying from someone in my country, but that doesn't make international trade bad. When you have a trade agreement, who has signed that trade agreement? I didn't sign the AfCFTA. You didn't sign the AfCFTA, your government did. So you treat it like a contract. It is, in fact, a treaty, so it's like a contract. And so if there's a breakdown in that contract, I'm not getting the rights under the contract as a citizen, I'm not able to go directly and say, hey, Salamowitz, or hey, Abubakar, I didn't get this. It's up to me to lobby my government. The government has to take it all the way up to the dispute resolution phase, which will happen at the Secretariat. And it's like this, not just the AfCFTA, it's every single trade agreement in the world, because these are international agreements signed by our governments. Now, should there be some sort of ombudsman where we can complain to say, I've bought something from Senegal, and even though I can't get the government to sue that government or take that government to court, what is there for me? There are mechanisms that are being put in place in terms of verification and how you can identify those people, and then you'll have to contact somehow in their countries. But it should be easier for private sector people to say, if I want to trade and you want to convince me to trade, you want to convince me to trust, then how do you make sure that my purchases are protected? Or if I've given a service, maybe I've given legal services online and someone doesn't pay me, what do I do then? That's where it becomes a little murky. Afrexim Bank has a tool that's called Mansa, and I think Mansa is very effective because this is a verification tool. How do I know that Siyabonga in South Africa is really who he says he is, and this is a really legit business? And that's what Mansa is for, where you can verify, and then you can purchase through PAPS, for example, which is the Pan-African Payment Settlement System. This is to try to fight off some of these disputes that could come through. But I'll be quite frank with you that when it then comes to a dispute on materially the AfCFTA, I'm not getting my rights, or my rights are being violated, I'm not getting the rate, or you are forcing me to have more licensed papers than what I need, then it becomes the state's responsibility. And here we are again. It will always come back to the state, because trade, the way it's managed, is actually pretty political. So it will always come back to the states, the willingness of the states, and the political will of those people. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
I think that's quite comprehensive. I think what's coming out a lot of this is that, you know, Africa's, the youth agents of AfCFTA and trading is actually a lot of work going into the lobbying of governments, and a lot of you know, identifying key value sectors and actually mobilizing around those sectors. I think those are the two most important things that have come up in this conversation beyond entrepreneurship. It's the fact that the government is the one that is supposed to be sort of managing these things, and there's also the fact of, you know, where are we actually concentrating our efforts so that it's not everywhere. So in terms of government incentivizing and that kind of lobbying, I know SETA has a lot of quite a bit of work that they are doing in that regard of trying to ensure that the government does not leave the youth behind. I don't know, Siyabonga, if you want to speak a little bit to that, perhaps we can learn some lessons in terms of what does that actually look like to lobby and incentivize.
Okay, no, thanks, Rutendo. I was listening quite attentively to Faith and Anele, to the point that I was bringing out my notepad to keep some notes, because, trade, as much as it's global and it's interlinking, it differs from region to region, from country to country, and from sector to sector. One of the things that we have done at the SA Youth Trade Association, we first identified that we're up against the trend in terms of, if you look how trade is being done, it's mostly on a sectorial basis. So you have your sector-specific approaches, but you rarely find the trade being done on a demographic dividend, which is what we are doing, that how can young people participate in these various value chains? So that was one thing we identified, that it would be a barrier to some, but we are then convincing them day by day. Just for an example, if you look at all our programs, whether you speak about the webinars or the business activations, we have made government to realize that trade cannot be done through a silo approach. For an example, each department has their own KPIs and they just decide to do trade alone. We have shown them that whenever we can pull together the various expertise and resources, we can effect much change to young people. Take, for an example, our previous program, that was the webinar on the oil and gas. In that program, we had the Department of Small Business Development, we had the Department of International Relations, and we had the Department of Trade, Industry, and Competition. And we spoke to saying, how can you centralize trade through these various departments? Because when you find in each department, there is an export unit or a trade unit, but they seem to work alone and they think that's enough. So that's what we have done, is to create SATA as that one-stop shop, that how can young people access these various and variety of information that seeks to help them, but now have a more amplified voice. To be honest, firstly, it was not easy. So I do get the sentiments of the colleague says there's no political will. We had to first persuade people who are tasked with such a mandate to say, how can they do it more effectively? And I think by now we're getting the fruits of it, that the government now sees the beauty in this interrelation and in this intercommunal cooperation. So that's how I think there's a way to move forward. But just to end off, one of our selling points was that innovation must have a place. And the reason we say that is because it's always been said that young people must be innovative, you must think of brilliant ideas. But young people then answered and had those ideas, but there was no place. What do I mean by a place? There was no place for funding. Young people still battle with access to finance. There was no place for access to market. So then we said young people must have innovative ideas, be granted a place. That's why most of our programs speak to access to a market, access to capital, because you might have the great idea, but there needs to be a bridge towards getting you towards that right place. So just to answer that question on government support and government intervention, I think that's how we have done it. And as I say again, it varies from country to country, region to region, but we first saw how we can play our own part as the SA Youth Trade Association.
Thanks so much, Sia. I think what you raised is a very important thing. The fact that there are government departments that are actually working in silos. And so because they're working in silos and there's these overlaps, it also makes the issue of trade even more complicated from a national level. And so maybe you don't even realize it's actually an innovative thing to just say, as youth, right, we understand there's these complexities, but what if we brought all these different departments together to find a way to make this thing a much more simplified approach, which is something Anele mentioned in the beginning, just simplifying trade and simplifying the very issue of actually trading. I think that's a very important intervention that we can learn lessons in our individual governments, is where are the areas that are not working just right. So the siloed approach being one of them, overlapping mandates being another one, and how as youth can we try to sort of bring those conversations together to sort of leverage the CFTA? So really appreciate that. Another thing you mentioned is the issue of innovation. Innovation must have a place, you said. And I think maybe Natan can really speak to that. In terms of what can we do as young people to be lobbying and ensuring that the space is conducive enough, and where can we ensure that all our innovative ideas find a place within the broader trade ecosystem? Natan, I don't know if you want to intervene with that.
Thank you, Rutendo. Of course, at the Women, Gender and Youth Directorate, innovation is a very important topic and area. For example, last year, we launched what's called the African Union Innovation Lab, which is like a strategic initiative that is designed to drive innovation across the Commission by fostering three thematic areas. One is policy innovation, the other one is functional ecosystems, leveraging these functional ecosystems, and then the other one is the application of practical tools and resources. So it kind of serves as a catalyst for innovation-driven solutions, supporting member states, institutions, stakeholders in kind of identifying and addressing key challenges through a kind of collaborative and human-centered approach. Of course, it's in line with what we mentioned before, things like Agenda 2063, but not only that, we have something called the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa, which, plans to make Africa a more inclusive and digitally empowered continent. So the lab basically works to integrate innovation within existing AU frameworks, kind of strengthen cross-sector partnerships, and most importantly, provide scalable solutions that kind of enhance governance, digital transformation, and also economic growth. It's a lab that we use to provide opportunities for young people as well. We recently even launched an initiative called AU Go Gal, where we are targeting young women from the age of 15 to 25 and giving them opportunities in mentorships, trainings, and in the end, for our top innovators, where we award grants. We were actually even looking at some of these applications that were done for this initiative, and some of these young women are coming up with very great innovative business ideas, in ways they can also deliver courses to different young people. But again, you can see from their ideas that when it comes to things like trade even, they're usually just some of them are on a market ready stage. So some are on conceptual, some are on market ready. For those who are on market ready, they've already been making an impact, but it's within a certain city or within a certain region, because they really can't get out of that position. So, I think this is something we take very seriously. Of course, with the launch of our lab, we are pushing for similar initiatives and programs that kind of touch on not only just trade, but education, financial inclusion, things like economic decision making. So we're pushing the youth kind of towards the direction of innovation, not only so that they can come in, but they can also be, part of the leaders that are driving this change. Thank you so much.
Nathan, I think just before I let you go, I think one of the things you mentioned is these initiatives and programs that are targeted and helping the youth. But one question that I have is, how exactly should youth be leveraging these programs? I mean, they seem exciting, they seem very helpful. But is it a question of you identify the specific youth, or are there ways in which young people can say, okay, perhaps at a government level I'm failing to do this, but perhaps I can also approach the AU's commission on women, gender, and youth and trade. And so how exactly do young people then try to, for lack of a better word, exploit some of these programs to get themselves moving and get themselves scaling?
Thank you, Rutendo. So the AU, as you guys know, is a policy making organ. So we don't really enforce these policies or force any member state to take on them. What we can do is create these favorable conditions, of course, for them to accept these policies. So for young people, what we do for them is we bring them, for example, through the lab, we bring them on, and we kind of give them the space to be leaders and change makers in challenges. So, for example, like with the initiative I mentioned, I think so they look at on the ground problems that are happening in the continent, for example. They're looking at on the ground continents, problems on the continent, and they're seeing different ways and bringing new ideas on how they say, I can change this challenge through this. So what we're giving them is, of course, things like mentorship, for example, that we are giving them with partners like AUCFTA, UN Women, for example. There's the United Nations Institute for Research and Training that are also giving them courses on this. So we give them courses like, for example, on entrepreneurship, or on innovation, on women's rights, things like this, youth empowerment, that basically they can take and apply within their existing innovative ideas and put them into work. So we're not saying we're solving this problem as the African Union, but we are supporting these young people to come out there and kind of solve, because they also have things like financial issues, for example. They're not able to do much because they are kind of financially restricted. So that's where we come in, and also, provide things like grants, for example, from our partners like CFA, where they can take these grants and grow their innovations and become change makers. So really, we're just a policy making organ, and we just try to create through the youth these favorable conditions that member states can kind of apply.
All right, thanks, and I think that's quite clear on the policy front. I see that we have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I just want to really focus on the issue of finance because it's been raised many times. This webinar has been ongoing. So I really want to open up the discussion and the floor to our speakers, definitely, and also to our audiences. What are we seeing as being some creative ways to finance trade amongst youth in the absence of, or rather in the sort of lack of the more traditional ways of financing businesses? Are we actually seeing some innovation in the front that perhaps people can learn lessons from? Open to the floor.
Perhaps let me start by just drawing from some of the initiatives that we have done. Fortunately, as the SA Youth Trade Association, we do sit in what is called the Economic Cluster Financing Forum, that is made up of your developing finance institutions, otherwise known as your DFIs. One of the things that we have realized is that in terms of your traditional banking, they will have their own set of rules. For an example, for a business to get finance, they must have an auditable history. You must be able to have a guarantee to back up the loan. But when we are being honest, how many young people do have that in place? How many young people do have assets to back their loans, number one? How many young people do have auditable financial statements? So what we did is that as part of our policy reform, we have issued what is called our SITA banking survey. So we went around to young people to ask them, what is their relationship with traditional banking? And from that survey, we had a data collection that showed us how young people view traditional banks and how they view traditional banks as one of the levers that can help them transform their businesses. It was quite stark to realize how young people are not in favor of traditional banking because of what they've experienced from the banking sector. That led us to engage in fully with the banking sector, that how can you then allow a conducive environment for young people to then be able to transform their businesses, to be able to scale up their businesses by having direct access to finance. So that is one of the initiatives that we are driving as SITA to say, in terms of policy reform, how can government come together with the private sector to ensure that young people can have access to equitable finance? One of the ways we have said is that, one, let's have a guarantee-backed funding within government. So government comes and backs the loans of your youth and your women-specific businesses. There's something called set-asides within each government department that it is a budget item which is set aside for a specific use. We have proposed that through the set-asides, they take those and back those loans within the private sector where the lending is going on. And that would then be for what is called your private-public partnerships, your triple Ps. That has been likely to fail in some instances. But we then said that the reason there's failure in those initiatives is how they were modeled. We need to model initiatives and solutions for the specific sector. So that's one way we are addressing this financing problem, to say, let's bring all role players to one party and see what each player can play in terms of changing the status quo. So we are very big on partnerships. We are very big on having a stakeholder forum to say, let's go in one direction. So as you would hear most times that I will speak against your silo approach, because it is why there's a lack of development within our country. So we always speak to solutions that can bring everyone together and form part of a good partnership. So just to give a brief background, that's what we are doing, because we have identified where the problem is within the private sector, and that's how we are addressing it. And just as an update, that document is doing its around, finding its way towards the various departments, towards the various banks, as well as the Banking Association of South Africa, which is the mother body of all banks in South Africa, where we had a meeting with them. So just to show the work that one document has done in terms of trying to change the status quo. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Sia. I think one thing that you've really brought out again is, as part of the lobby, is it seems there is a lot of proactivity that is going to be needed in terms of leading the research that is important to actually prove to these more traditional sectors that there is an opportunity here, and this is how you could go about it. So, from what you're saying, it's seeming that actually, as much as we are expecting governments to meet their obligations, as much as we're expecting the private sector to sort of step in, a lot of groundwork is going to have to be done by you to show exactly how these two sectors can come together for the benefit of the youth. So thanks a lot for that. I think, I just want to again continue to encourage comments, questions from the audience. Like we said, this is a completely inclusive dialogue. So let's see, as much as we want to rely on our speakers, we're also relying on some of the ideas and things that you're noticing in your own individual sectors. So please do continue to use the Q&A. We will be taking all of those questions. So now what I want to do is just sort of move us ahead to the issue of certification standards and trade readiness. Faith and Anele brought this issue up a lot, right? The issue of just trying to understand certification. And I think where the youth must be getting lost is that when you're now starting your business, maybe things are going well, and let's say you access the finance. Now you're like, right, this documentation that I must now do, right? And so how do you then, as a person, comply and understand and certify in the best possible way? Is the way we're sort of understanding that, and some of the challenges and complexities that come with the current certification standards that we have. So I'm just going to open up the question to all my certification. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, we can, but you were breaking a bit, so maybe you can come
about
again.
Yeah. So how big of a hurdle is certification for youth-led SME, and what reforms and tools could help to streamline access where cross-border compliance is concerned? I think I really want to open up this question to everyone, sort of get your different geographical perspectives on this one. Not to pick on anyone, but Natan, do you want to start us off?
I can start off actually. That's
okay, go ahead, Anele. Yes, of course.
I would say next to access to finance, which I hope we come back because that's one of my favorite topics here. And I was sad that I couldn't participate after Siyabonga, but yes, you have the money. Yes, you have the product. Your business is registered. You're ready to go. But again, there are certain things that you as a business, it's not up to you. And this comes down to laws and regulations. So you need to know, let's say, for example, my cell phone, right? I have this cell phone. Let's say I manufacture these cell phones in South Africa and it's great. I want to send them all over the continent. There's certain things that won't prevent that, even though this is a product that everybody needs, okay? And that's what entrepreneurs need to know. When you are developing, you need to also develop for the market, so not just for your own market. So for example, what would be the problem with this cell phone? Everyone needs it and it's cheap and it's made in Africa, why not? You need to look at the kind of charger this phone is going to use. In trade, we call these technical barriers to trade, or TBTs. They're a massive, massive hurdle. And everybody needs to know where I want to go to, what are the regulations needed. I know that when I travel to East Africa, the plugs that are being used in East Africa are not the same plugs I'm using in Southern Africa. So then why would I create this product only in the Southern African way? It won't work in the East Africa way. So what does that mean for that consumer over there? Or something just as simple as a sweater, a nice knit sweater with nice colors. What could possibly be the problem, you might ask? Well, maybe you might think of the labeling. You know, every time you buy a piece of clothing, it has a label. If I'm sending it from Southern Africa and it's going to North Africa, is my labeling in the right language? Do they speak English over there? Should it be in French? Should it be in Arabic? What does the law over there say? Or things like cosmetics, the creams you put on your skin, all good and well. You make shea butter, it's organic, it's lovely. We all love it. There's another sister of TBTs that we call SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary regulations. And these are there to protect people. I know we don't love them, but they're actually there to protect people and protect consumers, to protect the environment. So if I'm putting a product onto my skin, the government wants to know that you haven't used any banned substances. So of course you have to comply. If you're selling me food, beverages, you could be making hibiscus tea or zobo and you're transporting this amazing, delicious zobo. How do I know that the products that we use are not banned in this region or banned in another region? Where it becomes really special for Africa is that we're all one big family, but we are all like cousins and, you know, our different regions, our aunts and uncles. Those different aunts and uncles have different rules for their houses. So what might be banned in South Africa might be fine in Uganda, but it might not be fine in Tunisia. So what does it mean for me as an entrepreneur? I now have to make this one product in 7 different ways or 5 different ways to be able to send it across the continent. That's where the first hurdle was that they're working on now. You need to get onto ARSO, and I believe ARSO is having a webinar tomorrow, July 30th. ARSO is the African Organization for Standardization. I always get it wrong, but African Organization for Standardization, or ARSO, they are in charge and they know all of the standards of all of our countries. What should happen traditionally with the trade agreement like the AfCFTA is that we should have one standard that we all follow. And all the countries have agreed, all the aunts and uncles have said, okay, this is the standard, we're all going to follow this one standard. But that didn't happen. And then we started trading amongst ourselves without having fixed that. So they are working on what we call harmonization, which is making sure that all the laws say the same thing. That's where it's easier. But in the absence of harmonization, I believe that the AU member states are agreeing on mutual recognition. That is to say, if the Kenyan or Ugandan or East African governments have said this is the standard over there, and it's different in Southern Africa, we'll accept it. As long as you meet the standards of the EAC region, then this should be okay, we'll accept it. And then the North African regions might say the same thing, or whichever rec it is, that, okay, as long as you meet the standards and they're protective enough, and they also meet the international standards, then it should be okay. But standardization is a big hurdle. We talk a lot about money, but you can have all the money. You can have the best products, the best quality products. You have all the financial banking. That product is not going anywhere if you don't meet the regulations of the country that you're sending it to.
A lot for starting us off, Anele. I think a big part of the thing that you mentioned is the issue of standardization and really trying to harmonize and understand these different regulations of the different countries. I'm overwhelmed just listening to you, and I'm not even an entrepreneur. So I think one thing that's come out of what you're saying is actually the centralized approach to trying to ensure that as an entrepreneur, I don't have the budget to travel to Ethiopia or Nigeria any given day so that I can understand the regulations. And so how do we sort of try to centralize it in such a way that from where I'm sitting, I can already comply in the best possible way, if I can't afford that. So, again, just open this very same question on the issues of certification, Sia and Natan.
I can go next, because I think what Anele has said, mostly it feeds to exactly what I was going to say, right? But just not to reiterate that, but to like stamp and say, yes, I agree. The thing is, if we're moving from problem to solution, I think we need to understand what exactly is the problem, right? With youth in trade, leave alone like the other categories, because this is particularly youth in trade. I think we need to understand that, first of all, the problem is the finance. So if the problem is the finance, and governments actually understand that youth are having a trade finance or a development finance issue, then why don't we come up with things like certification schemes, right? That can be subsidized youth certification schemes. Why is that becoming mouthy? But a subsidized youth certification scheme. And this can be in the form of tax incentives, right? So that we can say that if a youth is getting into cross-border markets, and this is their first time, right? And they have ISO, or they have the hazard analysis critical control points certification, then that becomes a tax incentive for them. That means it's less costs that they're spending as they get into the market. Number two, I can think of a first-time certification grant. And like I said, I've had experience before with trying to help women and youth get into cross-border markets under the AfCFTA. And majorly, this was, you're a first-time trader. Typically, you're a first-time trader and you're getting first-time certification. So this means that you're not even going to pay for your ISO, you're not going to pay for your SPS or your HACCP. It's a first-time certification grant. So given it becomes more of an incentive for actually youth-led and youth-owned farms to try to get into scaling their products to have certification. Number three, I am thinking more in terms of simplifying these procedures from a policy and institutional aspect. And since we are in the spirit of providing solutions, I came across International Trade Center's trade obstacle alert. So it works similarly as the NTB's reporting mechanism, right? Where you go and you say that when I was crossing the border from South Africa to Kenya, I was bringing wine and my wine had issues at the border. I suffered or I incurred this cost, something similar. And this is a particular one that actually helps people with the youth actually to get into markets. So I could only hope and think that this becomes another platform or another digital tool that can have a pre-certification scheme or a pre-certification tool inbuilt in the digital tool, so that before I get to understanding actually what is needed for me to be certified as a youth trader or a youth owning farm, I have already gone through a pre-certification scheme, and I have all the information that I need. I know how much is required. I know which institutions to go to get my certifications. And even finally, this leads to my final point. The same thing that I spoke about, having a national youth dedicated desk, so that in every Ministry of Trade, in any national AfCFTA implementation committee, right, there's a dedicated national youth desk, so that if I am a youth and I need to understand how do I trade with South Africa, for example, I go there and this person is going to provide me every information that I need, including what Anele just mentioned about the conference that is happening tomorrow on ISO. Because if we don't have capacity building, if these people do not know where to get the information, if I don't understand what kind of products are needed in South Africa, who am I going to be trading with at the end of the day? I might get certified for all my products, but what if they get to South Africa and they're not required? What if they get to South Africa and they have, violated maybe a hazard control certification quality? So it becomes an issue of we have the knowledge, but these people who are in the market do not have the knowledge. So how do we disseminate that kind of information into the markets? And finally, really, this is something that has been mind-boggling to me, right? Because I feel like even the youth themselves, right? I know someone who makes my suits, and she exports these suits all over Africa, actually all over the world. But I could only hope that she understands that the AfCFTA is a preferential trade agreement. And by it being a preferential trade agreement, it means that there are reduced to zero tariffs. And that means that you can get your Kenyan-made product as long as it meets the AfCFTA rules of origin to Ghana at probably a very reduced cost. But this is the thing, right? Only 18% of people trading, and this is not even just the youth, actually all the traders trading across Africa, only 18% understand what what a preferential trade agreement actually imposes on their products. And this becomes a capacity building program, building problem that we need to come up with programs. When I say we, I feel like it's the private and the public actors coming together to actually come up with programs to provide capacity building to traders, for them to just understand that trading under the AfCFTA has financial and monetary benefits that could reduce the cost of trading without the FTA. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Sia. I see you're getting happy, excited, ready.
Thanks, Rutendo. You know, whenever we speak about such complex issues, but are able to bring them towards simplifying them, I get excited because the two colleagues spoke about topics that are quite close to my heart, which is your trade finance and your basic HSO codes. You know, we have, and I would say this boldly, we do have a knowledge gap between the youth in business that we do know and the export market. And our role is to how do we integrate such complex information to make them understand that it is for their benefit at the end of the day. You know, as Faith was speaking about the various financing schemes, it brought to light what we are busy pushing now, which is what we call your patient capital funding. Currently, as SATA, we are advocating for what we call as patient capital funding that focuses on growing with the business rather than rands and cents or dollars or monetary values. So what she spoke on the various schemes which is pre-investment, is what we are busy advocating for. Just to share some of the tools that we do have as the SA Youth Trade Association, which is of no cost to anyone. If you do visit our website, you would find a tab called your Global Tariff Tool and your Accurate HS Code Tool. What we have done is that through our partnership with the International Trade Council, we have embedded two tools to our website. The one tool allows you to understand the various tariff measures and the various regulations for your product to whatever country you want to export to. So for an example, if you just type the Kenya to South Africa and list your product, it will automatically give you the HSO code. And we do know how important knowing your HS codes is in terms of your export. And then beyond that, it will then give you market intelligence. What are the tariffs in place? What are the regulatory issues that are aligned to a specific HS code? This is for young people to understand that trade can be made simple, and we can simplify how we do global trading. The other tool is that if you do not know your HS code and you do not know your various requirements, you just type in the product that you have and what you would like to export to. And using AI, it will then auto-populate to you the various code linked to your product and the various market that has a high demand. So we are able to then make young people understand that when you are looking to export, you can have market intelligence before making your decision. And then just quite lastly, going back to my point about there's a knowledge gap, understanding this problem, also part of the partnership that we do have now with two institutions. One is the ITC, International Trade Council, but also with ITRISA, being the International Trade Institute of Southern Africa. They both have what you call your School of Exports, and your International Trade Academy, which is of no cost to our members, which will help them to understand the complex narratives of the export market, and then allows them through the self-paced course to understand how they can first gain knowledge, but also mitigate some of the challenges that are within the export market. Just to close, the reason we do this is because we understand that, yes, we can lobby for a conducive environment, but political will on the side of youth in business must be something that we do advocate for. If you're a young business person trying to get into global trade, you must understand that the trading environment will not speak about, no, she's a youth person, let's be lenient to her. There are standards. So equipping them to understand these standards is how we ensure that they can effectively participate. And then while we are busy with the reforms to make it more conducive for them. So we're just doing that twin task to ensure that young people can effectively participate now in trade and not wait until the reforms are in place, which will be then a later stage. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, I think that's quite clear that the trading environment is not going to be lenient just because you're youth. Information is definitely power in this case. I think one thing that I'm noticing from all of the solutions and suggestions and things that we're noticing from our various aspects of work is that actually amongst innovators and those who are digitally savvy and AI savvy, there's quite a lot of business opportunities here in terms of harmonizing standards or creating platforms where everybody can sort of get a sense of what is the regulatory environment, what are the different types of certifications that I need, sort of centralize that information in a way that you are able to sort of pre-certify, as Faith mentioned, be able to see, okay, if I am at 10% and I need to be 100%, this is what sort of steps I need to be taking. So for the business people in the room, please just include my name in your credits. That this has been brought up for you. Just want to point that out. This is a recorded session for when the businesses are taking off. Natan, I think you can sort of close us off in terms of the discussion around certification and some of the work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Rutendo, once again. So I think when it comes to trade certifications, particularly with the youth, there's, as we all know, different challenges. For example, even in Ethiopia, things you see from even people who I know try to engage with trade in the coffee business, for example. These things of trade certifications can be very bureaucratic. They can be very expensive. So if you haven't been in this environment and you're a young person coming in, it can be very, very hectic and frustrating, let me say, because many of these young entrepreneurs, they lack the money or even like the technical knowledge, to kind of go through this process. I think even when we're engaging youth in other areas, I think when we look at the youth in rural areas, for example, or within these underserved areas, they often don't even know which certifications they need or how they can access them. There's the language barrier, infrastructure, the internet access, of course, which even makes it even more difficult, I think. And even like our countries in Africa, for example, they have different certification and regulatory systems. So I think it brings me back to the point on the protocol on women and youth in trade. I think within this protocol, it kind of directs all state parties to kind of simplify and digitize certification, to look at these quality controls, these kind of compliance processes. I think this can help, kind of reduce bureaucracy and make things easier for these young people, especially, of course, those who come from the underserved areas, to obtain, necessary, let me say, trade documents. I think it kind of also pushes for the alignment of product standards, those things of health and safety requirements, and of course, trade rules, which many young people don't know across the trade rules across borders. I think it has something to do with also youth-specific support measures. I think we can also look at it requires states to kind of put in place technical assistance, like trainings and like mentioned before, financial incentives specifically, to youth and women, so that they can meet export and let me say quality standards. So I think which also includes support for navigating these complex certification frameworks. I think that's all on the protocol that I can think of. Again, we're not specializing in this area, so this is what I have. But of course, again, I know that, for example, when we were preparing for the Intra-African Trade Fair for this year, in 2023, there was kind of like AfCFTA compliance workshops where they were also pushing for, where youth learned specific documentation and processes, required to operate within these rules. I think they had also kind of like certification readiness modules, which focused on, again, the health and safety standards, these product labelings and legal registration. I think, we can use these opportunities like the Intra-African Trade Fair. We can use the protocol, I think, to kind of push to bring, more solutions, at least if we think we have the solutions to kind of expand and integrate the youth who are within urban areas, could be also, within these underserved areas, I think. Yeah, I pass it back to you, Rutendo. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. I mean, thank you so much for that. I think this really sort of brings us into understanding, where some of the complexities lie in terms of, what, once we've lobbied the governments, once we've lobbied the private sector, and made them understand what the opportunities are, youth themselves as well. Again, a lot of responsibilities being placed on the youth to be more proactive, information aware. I mean, information is key. A critical part that has also come up is the fact that access to information and the dissemination of information remains and continues to be a challenge. And so this is an opportunity and a pathway that, so African youth can actually sort of be more active in ensuring that their own access to information and that dissemination continues to be there. I mean, we can all somewhat agree that the government departments are not going to sit down and stop and say, oh, let's make it easy to find the information. It's often taken for granted that the information is out there. I think there are real opportunities for ensuring that access to that information will always be available. So I wish we could solve all the problems. I want all the problems to be solved in our webinar, but unfortunately they cannot be. So I'm just going to go around the room with some closing remarks from our various and wonderful speakers. If you could, what would you recommend and what would you want as a vision for strengthening youth participation in intra-African trade over, let's say, the next 12 months? What would that be? Anele, I see you smiling.
I was just listening. We're having such a good conversation, and it's sad that time really does fly when you're having fun. I just want to share what I learned last week, from Tuesday to like Thursday. International Trade Center and the government of South Africa, which is the G20 presidency this year, hosted the first or the inaugural ministerial SME forum. It was here. And the access to finance thing came up. And the banks said, and don't shoot me because this is what the banks said, not me. Banks said that for them as commercial ventures, because remember, they're for-profit companies, they're not NPOs, that it takes the same amount of effort and paperwork for them to fund a very big business as it takes for them to fund a small business. Same paperwork, same effort, but there's bigger returns over there at big business. And we can't hate them. This is business. And I think Rebecca asked, what are some of the creative ways that we should be looking at access to financing? And somebody from Startup 20, excuse me, Startup 20 is happening in November, by the way, in South Africa. Someone from there said they've been looking at using stokvel. Stokvel is when you save together. Our mothers did it. I do it. Every time I need a new phone, I'm in a stokvel. I'm putting the money away. Then it's my month. I take that money. Why are we not using that for the smaller things? You need to register your business. You need to pay certification fees. I liked a lot of what Faith was saying, and I was writing profusely about some of the different ways you could be solving for the small things. Maybe you need it for inventory. Maybe you need it for tax filing, whatever you need for business development. You need an accountant. Use your stock file money from a stock file you are with other SMEs. Standard Bank with Tunda.com has also started something, I believe last year or the year before, for crowdfunding, where Tunda is a crowdfunding platform, and you can pitch your business, this is what you do, this is what you sell, blah, 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 and you raise funds in that way. Because the banks are not coming to save us, guys, and banks are for-profit companies, they don't owe us. And if they're telling you that funding small businesses is unreliable, it's this, it's that, we need to find the ways that are creative, and young people are very creative. Find the creative ways to access that finance. Thank you.
I really love that. The local methods that we already know to have worked in the past to build our mothers' houses, so that you can fund your
not
business.
cash in transit, not heist, not rob the bank. I meant the creative lawful.
You see, you are a good lawyer. You had to ensure that that wasn't there. Faith?
To be very honest with you, I think I'm struggling to answer that question if you're just going to restrain me to like one, because I feel like there's a lot, right? There's a lot to do from policy side, from development actor side. I feel like there is so much more to put our heads together to actually like focus on resolving the youth problem. But the top of my head, the thing that I can think of is political willingness. I feel like if our states are still not ready to look at how much value the youth can bring from trade, we still have a long way to go, because from political willingness, we come down to policymakers, we come down to development actors, we come down to responsive policies. If really we don't have the political willingness, because I mean, let's even go beyond AfCFTA, Women and Youth Protocol. Look at the AfCFTA in itself. So good, so ambitious, so prosperous, so promising. But is there political willingness? Like at the end of the day, are states really ready to trade with each other? Are we bringing these policies from, what I keep saying, from paper to action? At the end of the day, it's still going to be political willingness. But just to sound very optimistic, like the way I've always been with the AfCFTA, I can say that I think I encourage the fact that youth are becoming ambitious to trade. And they're now understanding that there actually benefits trading cross-border and just moving across your country of residence. I think that's a good thing. What I would say is that if there are any youth in the webinar who are listening to us want us to give them solutions, I would say come to us. Come, let us have those conversations, come tell me where you have your issues in terms of customs and in terms of rules of origin. Come, let me tell you where you can go. Come, let me explain to you how the AfCFTA works. Let me explain to you how you can trade on preferential trade agreements. Come, let me talk to you. Instead of Googling and like messing up and spending a lot of money on compliance costs, come to us. If the ministries of trade are not going to set up youth dedicated desks, come to us. I'm going to leave my email. Come to me. Thanks.
Young, bright, educated. This is what it means to have an educated Africa. I love that so much. Natan, your final reflections, please.
Okay, so in terms of recommendations, I think I would go with something more of that's in line with my work. So in terms of, let me say, practical action, I would recommend, these kind of trade readiness boot camps, let me say, for youth startups at least. Something like a continental-wide series of boot camps that we can have. It could be virtual or in-person missions, focused on helping startups become more involved and export ready. A program that kind of would offer training on how the AfCFTA works, help with business registration, certifications, kind of connect startups also with potential buyers in other African countries. I think that is one I would say. To just to add another one, I think we need to change mindset. I think it would be something common, maybe I'm saying, but you know, we always talk about you know, about youth. We often say like youth are the future, but in reality, you know, they are already building real businesses, moving products across borders, I think, and you know, using platforms, and they use these social medias, Telegram, TikTok, I think. So I think you know, mindset shift is something we need to recognize, and also, you know, young people are already active players in the economy. So we must treat them, I think, in that certain way. They should be, you know, at the table where decisions are on trade, you know, e-commerce or digital infrastructure. You know, they should be at these tables where these decisions are being made. Let me say, thank you.
And thanks, Natan. Yeah.
No, thanks, Rutendo. And I was just writing as the colleagues were summarizing. And you know, Anele mentioned something that I also experienced because I was also a delegate to the Global SME Ministerial Meeting. And I also, in one of the sessions, found myself to be perplexed in terms of the attitude from industry. And I think it's what summarizes my closing reflections. You know, we are all aware what M-Pesa did in terms of the mobile and banking industry. To some, they never saw it coming, but when it did come, it was a wave and it brought about industry innovation. I think the same can be said about the informal sector. And when I think about the informal sector, I think about a businesswoman that sells shea butter in Kinshasa, selling it to Nairobi, selling it to South Africa, Johannesburg. We know the informal market is vibrant, but what is not vibrant is the harmonization and the global access of that sector. So we might be speaking now as if it won't happen, but I do believe that, like the mobile banking industry, we will see the informal sector come to life. And at the closing point, I really do want to advocate for what is called the simplified trade regime. I know it's been done partly in some sectors within Africa, but one thing I do know that when we do it properly, we would see how the informal sector can contribute towards the overall growth of Africa in terms of reduced barriers to entry, in terms of the growth of various GDPs, and the growth of young people having access to protected markets, which will enable them to grow and to scale up. So as I close, I don't want to close on a data-specific point, but I do want to close on how do we re-envision an Africa that is driven by a vibrant sector, but I do enjoy the formal benefits, such as the other big businesses. So that is my closing remarks, that it's something that we are passionately advocating for as SAITA, to see the informal sector, a young person in Mamelodi, Johannesburg, making bikes, finding its way to the various markets. So, and I do thank the participants that have been with us until this time, and the panelists that have graced us with such great inputs, and yourself and Rebecca for this session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it. I have tried to keep us 10 minutes under time, but we are over time a little bit. But thanks so much to all of our speakers. I think we've come out of this session with quite a number of recommendations, solutions, and also understanding where we, as an active and proactive youth, can sort of improve the way that we are accessing and approaching trade. My favorite thing was what Anele said about the fact that we have some local solutions that have been working with stockpiles. Why are we not exploiting them? Some of the things like Sia said, that there is a vibrancy in the informal sector, but simplification and access to information is the way forward for us. We will soon be releasing sort of a report by compiling all of the perspectives from our various speakers. I think everybody should be on the lookout for that. In the meantime, have a good evening, have a wonderful day wherever you are, and thanks so much for joining us.